I'll hand it over to you, and you can speak more about this film, and let everyone
Okay.
digest and can think of their own questions.
Okay. So we have about, what time is it now?
It's
We have about
26.
Yeah. So we have about 50 minutes. Yeah. So I'll try not to gobble up all the time with this presentation. So let me share the screen first of all. Let's see. Just let me know you see this. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. So so what I'm going to just do is sort of in its most simplest terms, I suppose, is just try to give a genealogy of the film, how it came about, some of the thinking behind it, some of the ways that we engage with the site, engage with the people, and the sort of ethical implications. So I'll just go for it here, okay? So firstly, thanks to Irit and Nick for allowing me the opportunity to show Uppland. I think this is probably going to be the last time I'm going to screen Uppland for some time, because it's it's at the end of its life in terms of showing it around. So it's very nice to kind of finish it here with you guys. So yeah, so like I practiced as an architect, I trained as an architect, and I've been working mostly in Rwanda as an architect on a number of projects, which I suppose fall under humanitarian architecture, but whether they are humanitarian architecture, because they were like one of them was for FIFA, one of them was for the Rwanda Cricket Federation. Some of these projects were with Light Earth Designs, which I believe Michael Ramage at the Cambridge University was part of. So anyway, this is sort of was the starting point for me, this sort of work, and I became sort of let's say dissatisfied with it in terms of kind of its inability to really kind of get to grips with some of the issues around land ownership. Yeah. The sort of politics of land and natural resources, and particularly other ways of being, like other ways of, let's say, non-Western ways of being, like in relation to the land, right? And so this image here is just the site in Rwanda, the site in Liberia, and site in Sierra Leone in the context of, deforestation. So just to sort of situate the sorts of work that I was doing, and kind of not really kind of being able to grapple with these larger issues. So the film was really the film was a way to sort of, I don't know, articulate some of these concerns. And so Upland, the film, came to be firstly through visiting the site first of all in 2013, when I was on a consultancy with the World Bank. I was asked to look at schools across all of Liberia, look at the kind of construction project and report on them. And one of the last schools that we visited was in the Nimba region. And I'd stayed overnight there. I hadn't really seen it. It was nighttime when we'd arrived. And so I didn't get to see the town, but the school that I was visiting was on the edge of the town. And then the next day we went into the town, and it was heavily fortified, so I was like, what is this place? There's so much security. And then having seen the town and the layout of the town, the kind of sort of, the kind of modernist town plan and the architecture, I was like, what is going on here? And so then on my return, I kind of looked into it and found out about the history of it. And I'd studied in Sweden and lived in Sweden a few years past, and there was no, in my reading of this colonial history of Africa, Sweden weren't even, they hadn't appeared anywhere. So I was like, what is Sweden doing in Northern Liberia? So anyway, and so I went back a few times over the subsequent years. My wife was working, we were in Liberia and Sierra Leone. She was working for Johns Hopkins, and she was involved in the Ebola response. So we went up in 2015 to Yekepa again, and you know, it's a really difficult to get to. It's on the frontier. You can see here on the map. It's way right up on the edge of between Guinea and Ivory Coast. So, and this is the railroad that was mentioned in the film. You know, the railroad that Lamco had built. So, sorry. So I was sort of interested in the kind of history of the site, sort of the way it was, the history of its making and its decline, but also its, you know, its entanglement, its sort of global displacement. Like, where was the ore going to? Why was there such a demand for ore in this place, or what, you know? And so this goes way back into the 1950s and 60s, you know, following the Second World War, the kind of ore reserves in Europe and the Western world had been depleted. So there was a sort of another scramble for Africa, and Liberian ore was super rich in content. It didn't require much processing after, and it was like, you know, as I say, it was super rich. So yeah, at one point it was going into Chicago to supplement the car manufacturing industry. And you know, today ArcelorMittal, who own the mine, are using their structural steel goes into, I mean, the building in the middle is the Vanderbilt Tower in New York, and then to the right you have what's his name? Sorry, I'm blanking. The Orbit by oh, someone remember. Anyway, the famous artist that I can't recall. Anyway, so I was just interested in this sort of displaced histories of it. And so then at the time I was doing, when I was started the PhD at the Bartlett, I took MA architecture history with Jane Rental and site writing, and it was an opportunity to kind of get into the site, you know, it's a sort of entry point. So I went back in 2016 and tried to kind of come to terms, like I was trying at that point, trying to make connections between the orbit in London and the regeneration of the Queen's Olympic Park, because UCL were, and they are now out there. So it was this kind of regeneration project, the orbit and Liberia. So I was trying to like tie these places together, and it became a kind of small project. But at this time I was trying to write to ArcelorMittal to get access to the site. And I just wasn't getting anywhere. You know, I wasn't getting anywhere with them. And this is an image of ArcelorMittal's office overlaid with archival. It was like a newsletter during the 20 or 30 years that Lamco were in operation. They wrote a series of newsletters, or the Swedish community did. And so I was overlaying, juxtaposing like the Lamco's open door policy with these sort of these images. But anyway, so the absence and the sort of the silence and the unresponsiveness sort of became very much at the kind of core of the project, you know, like, you know, the mystery of this place. And then it became a sort of like small like project about telling people about this mine, but going to the park, Olympic Park in London. So showing them a model of the mine and trying to give them a sense of the scale of the footprint of the mine in Liberia and in relation to the orbit. So because the orbit, which was a project commissioned by ArcelorMittal, yeah, they would talk, the narrative was about, you know, the sort of the environmentally friendly way of extracting, of mining, of the kind of recycled steel. So it was a sort of way to kind of talk about the mine, to kind of create and unsettle this place in London. So this was like a bit of the mine. This was some of the soil, the soil that I'd smuggled out in a bag, and a series of kind of postcards. And this was inspired sort of by Alan Sekula. I don't know if you know Alan Sekula, the photographer and filmmaker. So I was inspired by kind of some of his works and his methods. Yeah, about sort of narrating the kind of complexity of these places and how they're made up of other places, and the sort of the sort of cultural imaginary, like so anyway, Alan Segal, I was reading his work at the time, so I was inspired by this. So so that was the sort of first kind of way into it. And then I met with Edward through UCL. Edward was a filmmaker at the time teaching at Kingston, but practicing as well. And we met through UCL, through the anthropology department, visual anthropology. And he had an interest in new towns in Scotland. And Yekepa was in Newtown, and he did a film project in Scotland on Glenrothes, his hometown, which is a mining town. And I'd seen it, and I was like, oh, I told him about Yekepa, and we won a grant, a small grant to go to Yekepa. So me and Ed went there in 2016. And when we went there, I'd already kind of established communications with an organization called the Sustainable Development Initiative. I mean, they're doing the work on the ground. They're a sort of watchdog. They're advocating for sort of more transparency with mining, and as a means for those who get equal rights of, the spoils of mining, to kind of make sure land is farming land and land that is of cultural value or of ancestral value is not taken over. So they're doing all the work. So we went to see them and said, look, who would we speak to in Yekepa? And they put us then in touch with Lawrence Tokpa. And you hear Lawrence in the film speaking, and Lawrence lives outside Yekepa. He's a local community leader. He speaks the Mano dialect. So he kind of accompanied us around and put us in touch then with the local communities, the indigenous community, the Mano community. And so, what was going on in Yekepa is the devastation is immediately transparent. You just go up into the mine, you see the hole in the ground, you see all this waste, but there's all this sort of patchy history or forgotten history about it. And so we met with those who'd once worked in the mine, had traveled from Monrovia, the capital, as young men to get a job here. In the film, it's Yekepa's was memorialized and still is as the kind of the New York of Liberia. So it's like a utopia. Everyone wanted to be there. So these people are still there 30, 40 years on. So we went and met with them. But there was no the history of displacement and dispossession of the Mano community. But Lawrence knew about them, and so he introduced us to us. So knowing Lawrence was key. It opened up this other.
Sorry, Killian, I think you just cut out and paused. Zoom.
Anyway, but this was probably the most difficult part of the film to make, in the sense that, there was this sort of expectations that things were going to change as a result of the film. So we had to manage expectations and said, look, we're two guys, two broke academics. There's no way, the film can be a vehicle to kind of like talk about it and tell the story, but like we do not have the means to change anything, but we will, it'll be, to say, a vehicle for the story of it. But also, they were understandably very suspicious of us, given the kind of history of, Sandy Clark, the Scottish geologist who arrived 40 or 50 years previous in a helicopter and hands them a white piece of paper. We were using I don't know if you know about free, prior, informed consent. It's a kind of method when it's a sort of how you're meant to kind of engage with a community, a vulnerable community, and you have to explain the research and explain the intentions of the work. It's sort of like bottom-up participation. It's a form of consultation. So we'd sort of been adopting these methods, but we were using pieces of paper. And so they were very kind of suspicious of that. So that was a really difficult part of it. And that's why in the film, there's a moment where we show the sort of performativity that is particular to development as a result of these uneven power dynamics, you know, where the guy is trying to orchestrate and direct people off camera. So we felt that that was a really important piece to kind of keep in. So anyway, you know, there was discussions with the community, long discussions about what the film was going to be, what we wanted to know, and how were we going to pay them for their time? Because if, you know, they would be out working in the field or doing that. So we had to kind of discuss, you know, how do we go about this? You know, how do we pay them for their time? You know, and having been working in Sierra Leone prior to this, and you know, it's continually a thing that's come up, you know, about paying people for their time. So, and we can discuss that a bit more later if you want. Anyway, so we'd made the film in Liberia, but there was this other side, of course, and the Swedish side of the story that we wanted to capture, you know, because Yekepa is of Liberia, but it's also of Sweden, you know. And so then we traveled to Sweden and tried to find the former residents of Yekepa. And that was just by going into a lot of the Swedes who lived there have an online archive where they, you know, the sort of memorializing, and it's a site of nostalgia and memory about like their lives there. So we had to try to find all these people. So this is Bengt, and his mum, Bengt's father, was the guy, he was the pilot, and he had all that aerial footage. So we got all the kind of Super 8 footage of him, of the aerial. And then this is Ulf Mellon. And these guys are, you know, getting on now. They're in their 80s, you know. This is Ulf. So he worked for Ericsson, the mobile phone company, the Swedish mobile phone company. And he was there as an engineer to install the first electronic payroll system in Africa that was part of the Lamco's operations. They were, as I say, they were quite open, and we weren't there to sort of incriminate them and sort of make them feel bad. We were just, you know, sort of let them just tell their story and, you know, talk about it, Yekepa. So, so the film essentially came about sort of through photography that I'd taken earlier on, a few years prior to it. You know, me and Ed, we revisited these sites and we went with a video camera. Edward trained me up on how to record sound, and I recorded the sound there and then. And sort of the sequencing of the photography that I'd taken previously, and with the new edition of the Mano community, with the displaced community, that sort of became these sort of three chapters of Yekepa, and Stockholm. And so then there was a huge team involved in this after, you know, there was Philippe on the left, who's a sound designer, and Philippe had experience in, I believe it was Senegal and Mali. So he kind of knew how to work with the sounds, you know, he had a sense of the place, right? And so he designed the sound to kind of complement what we'd shot. Jet in the middle is half Nigerian, so she kind of understood the kind of colors of the landscape that weren't necessarily captured, so she helped with the grading and brought those out. And then Sam, the musician, tried to then respond to that. And so I don't know if you'll hear it in the background, it's a sort of quite ambiguous, a sort of ethereal soundtrack. It's just there, these sounds. So just kind of giving you an idea of all the other hands that helped make this film. Then we've Daida Lugan, who's a pastor, and I found him through the network. There's a lot of sort of, the research is about finding people and making sure that we have the right peer reviews. This was part of the peer review process, I would say, you know. So Daida Lugan's from that part of the region, and so he made sure that our translation into English from Mano was accurate. And then Robtel Paley, she's a sort of political scientist from Liberia. And so we wanted to be sure that, you know, the representation and kind of story the way we were showing the film was balanced, you know. And then, yeah, of course, then the film was made, and it went on tour. We showed it, we screened it internationally. We showed it at a number of film festivals. And then after kind of having done that, we in 2019 we took it to Sweden, and we took it back to Sweden to screen it to those who were in the film, but also their children who were born in Yekepa, but now in their 40s and 50s and had never returned. So we screened this in, it was a film festival and it's a really interesting one. You might want to look into it. It's the Environmental Humanities Lab at the KTH in Sweden. And so what it tries to do is use film as a sort of peer review piece of works, or it's a peer review process, but also the film is the publication, so it's a sort of film being a research output. But anyway, we use this as an opportunity to invite the Swedes, the elderly there. The older people were those who lived there were a bit ruffled by it. They were a bit upset it made them feel there was this level of discomfort. It was hard to kind of explain, but some of they were saying, oh, you may have forgotten about this. And but the young people, their children who'd never been there, were quite moved by it. They felt that we'd represented it in a way that was neither accusatory, but not sort of not simplifying, not allowing this sort of nostalgia of the place to kind of but it doesn't text. So there's like a number of other sites and other things that kind of branch off from the film. So ArcelorMittal, who own the mine, it's just a bit of background information about them. So and coal. So these are natural resources that are automotive and construction industry, and these are the mines these are the operations in America. So it's all building upon the old infrastructure of the Rust Belt. It's in Canada, and then on the right hand side you can see, the skyscraper right next to the World Trade Center is the Vanderbilt Tower. So this is possibility language of how ethical their practices are. So as I say, in 2013, ArcelorMittal reopened plants across America's abandoned Rust Belt. So they kind of traffic in this, the sort of donor speak, but ArcelorMittal is so Lamco ceased operations in 1989 on the eve of on the year of the Liberian Civil War, and then during the Liberian Civil War, the site was taken over by Charles Taylor, the kind of warlord. But he was in dealings with a number of European mining companies. And one of those companies was called Usinor, and they then took over the mine after, and then ArcelorMittal merged and bought it off them. So there's this whole sort of layer of really, really deeply unethical practices. So ArcelorMittal's built on really dubious kind of business foundations. So in 2010, mine, as you've seen, they opened up the mine at Yekepa, and they were doubling the level of extraction here. By 2014, Lamco's infrastructure, the train line, the schools, the hospitals, only partially rehabilitated. But Mittal's priority was the railway line. So they weren't so much concerned about the railway line up and operating again so that they could, basically take the ore out from Yekepa and get it out of the country. So, and then in 2015, Ebola hit. And one of the first things that ArcelorMittal did was begin to partition off one of their buildings. So I was there in 2015 and sort of witnessed that. but the long-term implications of what's kind of is going on are just kind of coming to the surface now. There's like heavy polluting of the water supply of the nearby rivers, and most of the people that live there don't have plumbed water, so their water supplies are absolutely kind of ruined. And so these issues are only kind of really coming to the surface. But they're not fully known just yet. But things are not getting any better. So what we see here, mine, and you can see Yekepa is just to the left of that. So then in what year was it? I think it might have been 1 or 2 years. What year was it? A couple of years ago. The World Bank had given consent to a Canadian mine to explore a new mine. Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, sorry, it feels like 2020 all over again.
Questions just in the chat.
Yeah. Yeah, let's do that. I like that. Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about this? Does anybody have any questions they would like to ask, and like type them into the chat?
I've switched over to my phone, so it might be a little more stable.
Oh, okay.
So you just ask away. I think this should be okay now.
Oh, okay. Fantastic. Does anybody have any questions off the bat?
What did the community think of the film?
From Flora, a pressing question is, what did the community think of the film once you showed it back to them?
Oh, sort of mixed feelings. I mean, I think, so again, it was a sort of, managing expectations. They were like, well, what's going to change for us? Is anything going to change? They were telling us that ArcelorMittal are aggressively, things are not getting any better for them, that they even want to kind of cut the road after their village. And, we said, look, what we can do with the film is show it around, what we're taking it to. I mean, it was going to go to Sustainable Development Initiative, so that would sort of so they could use it alongside their work. But they were mixed feelings about it. I mean, I think they were really happy we came back. So they said that for a long time they just thought we'd forgotten about them, you know. And so they were very enthusiastic we were there. They were very happy with the fact that their story had been taken outside of Liberia, and that Europeans had seen it. But they were also aware that, I think that they wanted to know what was going to change, for them. And we really couldn't. I mean, we didn't know what to say to that. What do you say to that? It's really, really difficult. We were just trying to reassure them or remind them that the purpose of it it's a sort of vehicle for the story of this place, I mean, because you're up against kind of immense powers, with ArcelorMittal and even the kind of Liberian government. So, but yeah, some mixed feelings. I mean, but they were really delighted we came back,
No, that's good. That's fantastic. And I'm interested in the process of, because I guess then you made the film and you went back, I guess, twice. First to do the translation of it, and then to show that translated version to the people of Yekepa. And the process of going back to do the translating, what was that like? Because I don't know, as you're continuing this project, like again, and involving new characters and new people into this whole process. And what was, I'm just interested in what that was like.
Yeah, so sorry, maybe that wasn't clear, Nick, in the presentation. So we didn't go back to do the translation. We did that from remote. We did that. I was in Edinburgh. Edward was in London, but I'd managed to find. So we had a team in Edinburgh who deal with the translation of foreign films into foreign language. So, and I'd found through the network of Dai, the guy who originally checked I suppose, the kind of accuracy of the translation. I asked him, does he know anyone that writes Mano? Because it's not a language that is, traditionally written down, So these are or like an oral society, they sort of communicate through words, through songs, through stories, right? So there's not a history of this text, this language being written, but we got Othello, who you saw the image of writing it. He fled during the Civil War and he's in North Dakota. So we did it over Zoom with him, and then we got him into a recording studio in North Dakota and directed it from there. And then we went through it again. So we translated it, from our respective homes. And then once we had that and we were sure that it was accurate enough and we had the subtitles, then we went back to Yekepa. So we went back in 2022. And prior to that, we weren't there since 2016. So that was 6 years later, yeah.
Right. It's interesting. Something I thought that the end of the movie was quite poignant about. You've done this work and you've gone through several visits over several years to do this research, but the end where you kind of say, oh, you wanted to ask these security guards more about their disappointment that the mine wasn't being reopened, and yet
Yes.
you, as the researcher filmmaker, you yourself have to kind of leave the place behind.
Yeah.
I wonder about the like using film as research, and then this, I don't know, maybe the commitments that researchers perhaps need to make to places like that you do research in. Like, at what kind of time scale do you feel this research needs to kind of unfold that?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's I feel like it's
yeah, look, I mean, during that visit, one of the other objective was to get some people in the room, or a room, who had some authority over mining concessions. So the Irish embassy have a presence in Monrovia. So through them, and the Swedish embassy have a presence there, obviously as a sort of the legacy of what Lamco did. So I got in touch with them and I said, look, this is the film we've made. Do you want to see it? And so they organized a screening at the Swedish embassy, and they invited DFID, the UK aid agency, the Irish aid agency, and then a number of people from the Liberian government who are in charge of, or who are involved in granting mining concessions, and the community representatives. We have people from Yekepa who represent their civil society groups. So they were in a room and we showed it to them, and we didn't say anything and we just let them talk. And so there, as a result of that, there were requests by local media outlets to have a copy. There was a request by the Women's Caucus in the House of Representatives to have a copy, and they've talked about wanting to show it in the House of Representatives at the point of when, so using it as a sort of, I don't know, I wouldn't say to inform policy, but use it as sort of like a learning tool to say, look, we've done this in the past, and this is what's happened to Yekepa. Yeah. So it lives out there. The community have their copy, and that's about as much as we could have done. It was like, that was sort of, it felt like the end of it.
yeah.
So yeah, sure. But certainly making the film and screening it abroad in Europe, it was incomplete. It was incomplete until we returned the film and restored it there.
I feel like, does anybody else have something they want to say? Nico?
I guess if my question is like related to this disappointment that you are kind of discussing earlier, that the community kind of felt in this sort of moment of, well, what's actually going to happen. And I wonder if you think about your role as like a researcher, I suppose, whether you're kind of comfortable with doing documentary work, or whether, because like there's this sort of thing like you have to document something before you can act on it, surely. But then obviously, for the people who have stakes in the situation, the activity is like maybe this is a kind of a false dichotomy, but it's kind of the bit that's really, really important. And so how do you feel, I guess it's a pretty difficult question to answer, but how do you feel about that? And do you think there is that kind of interesting play between just documenting so that activity can take place, or like there can be kind of that educational resource there for activity to take place in the future, I guess is my question. Sorry, very convoluted, but yeah.
Sorry, but so what's the actual question?
Yeah, I guess as a researcher, how do you view this kind of, dichotomy between documentary or kind of activity? Do you think it's like your role to kind of just document, or do you think your role should extend towards acting on these issues that you document, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of both. I mean, you know, we're not gratuitous documenters. I mean, so, you know, we don't just, you know, initially in the first kind of cuts of the film, it was like, you know, wanting to strike the balance between, how do I say this? We didn't want the film to be about ruin porn, you know, just like the kind of the blighted landscape. Yeah, it wasn't about that. And having met the community, we sort of felt a real responsibility to just allow that story to be told, you know. But at the same time, you know, the adjacency of the Swedish people talking alongside them within the same frame of the film, it was important that the film kind of held those different perspectives of Uppland together, but in tension, you know. And so I feel that it's more than just documenting. There's a sort of a responsibility or a sort of criticality about placing them together, you know. So that's sort of the activity, you know, about so I think it's both. It's both. You have to do both, you know. But I'm not a filmmaker, you know. So, you know, I was working with Ed, but I'd sort of would have been maybe more wary of the sort of pitfalls, the representational pitfalls. I mean, because like working in sort of the field of humanitarian field and working with NGOs, and how there's often a particular way of narrating their successes, you know. So I'm sort of wary of that, the sort of gaze, you know, instrumentalizing the gaze, you know. And it wasn't, we were really wary of that, you know. And we're doing another film now, but in Sierra Leone, and we're just really careful about committing to, you know, we're very slow, and we're conscious and taking our time with it, and we're showing it to other people, you know, to make sure. Yeah, I mean, the next the next site is really, really difficult too, but no, I mean, it's really hard to do this, to kind of strike that balance, you know, without being extractive, you know, ourselves, because we did feel that way. And then again, in the returning it, we didn't want it to be tokenistic, like we're just returning, that's it, we've done the work, you know. So there was a kind of directing of getting the right people in the room, you know. I thought was about as much as we could do, you know. So I don't know if that answers your question, Nico.
No, it's a great answer. I'm sorry. I hope it didn't come across as if I was accusing you.
No, not at all. No, not in the slightest. Not in the slightest. You know, and you know, let's be honest. All right, we're two white guys. You know, I get that, right? I get that. We're two white guys in, you know, northern Liberia making a film. Like, who are we? You know, and it's something we have to kind of, you know, we're constantly discussing. You know, but like, let me say this. Let me say, as someone from Northern Ireland, I think I can speak to kind of histories of land dispossession, you know, and it's not the sort of history that is just unique to kind of this part of the world. So, you know, some of my interests in my own, where I'm from, you know, I see kind of like similarities with it, you know. So it's not necessarily a kind of, it comes down to kind of a question of race for me, you know. It's a kind of question of like, you know, sort of the particular, the kind of the commonality of that struggle, you know. And I just want to mention, right, one last thing. So you know that the minute COP28 is taking place in Dubai, right? And so apparently the United Arab Emirates are buying up vast amounts of land, right, to sell carbon credits. And they've bought about a tenth of Liberia's landmass, you know, just recently. So, you know, it just continues, you know. And yeah, so I mean, and if you look at the land concessions of maps of Liberia, about 70% of this land is under concession, you know. It's just, and bear in mind, there's another historian, there's another guy, I forget his name, but he did a film on Firestone, the rubber plantation. So Firestone were also in Liberia. So you might want to check that out. Gosh, what's his name? It'll come to me. I'll send it to you, Nick, and you could pass it on.
Please do. Thank you, Killian. I think on that note, we'll let you go. I know you have a thing to get to after this. So I guess just a round of applause and a thank you for sharing your time with us and sharing.
Yeah. Sorry for the technical issues, you know. I would rather much be there in person, but it's family life, it's just not possible. But maybe another time.
Yes, definitely another time.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, Killian, and thanks everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.